Are werewolves cool? Well, some think they are and some don't. But in today's video, I wanted to give you some insights to this mythological animal that are subject of many stories, including more popular works like Twilight and True Blood. The fact that the werewolf has remained popular for so long is more than likely linked to how they serve as a strong metaphor for the bestial urges that one could think exists within mankind itself. We're going to take a closer look at these fascinating creatures in today's video and at the same time hunt for some inspiration for your own world building. Let's get into it. Hi guys, my name is Jesper and welcome to the Fane of Fantasy. This channel is all about giving you inspiration to master your craft and create fantasy that will truly immerse your audience. The werewolf has been the stuff of legends since ancient times, and the word were even means man in Old English. So it's quite impressive how many different cultures across the globe has their own version of the werewolf mythology. Because of the many different views on the werewolf, we also find anything from shapeshifters to it being a mutant between human and wolf. We're probably dealing with one of the oldest legends in recorded history here, although it's hard to really trace its origin. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a poem from ancient Mesopotamian, that is often regarded as the earliest surviving great work of literature. But in Gilgamesh refused to become the lover of the goddess Ishtar because she had turned her previous mate into a wolf. In Greek mythology, we also find the legend of Lycaon. Now, I found a few different variations of this story, but in the end, Lycaon is turned into a wolf. In Nordic folklore, in the saga of Volsung, we also told of a father and a son who discovered wolf pelts that had the power to turn people into wolves for 10 days. So you see how stories around the werewolf has been around for about as long as human civilization has. It's not only an old idea, but a widespread one. I think it's pretty safe to conclude that religion has had quite an impact on the werewolf myth. You see, during the Middle Ages, you had towns that were underdeveloped and people would live near woods. So the fear of wolves were real. And when Christianity found it impossible to basically stop the myth of the werewolf, they absorbed the werewolf as shapeshifters, being accepted as an instrument of Satan. Well, now Christianity ended up actually elevating the werewolves as something that was indeed real. Although I very much doubt that that was ever their intention. But throughout history, we find records of the trials of confessed or accused werewolves. This is no different from witch hunts really, although it was never as intense and widespread as witches, but men were in fact persecuted for being werewolves. There were werewolf trials, and some people would even get arrested simply because villagers needed someone to blame for the death of livestock or some other explainable occurrence. So found guilty of this punishment, the punishment was execution. One of the most famous werewolf trials were that of Peter Stump. We are now in the German town of Bedburg in 1591. So this Peter Fellows was supposedly caught by his neighbors in his wolf form. They claimed that they had tried to scare the wolf off with sticks and spears, but instead of fleeing, it had stood up and turned into Peter. He was then put on the torture wheel and he confessed to have killed 16 people, including women and children. It was also believed that Peter had committed cannibalism, although I have to say I didn't find anything more than anecdotal evidence of that. As you can imagine, there are plenty of other cases, like in 1521 in France, with Pierre Burgot and Michel Verdun were executed as werewolves. These guys seems to have been a serial killer team. And again in 1573, also in France, we find a man called Gilles Garnier, who were also convicted as a werewolf, and he too confessed to be a serial killer. There are numerous of accounts like these, and let's not, for now at least, dwell on how they used torture to acquire these confessions, because that is certainly something, there is certainly something to be said about that, but it's not hard to understand how the werewolf becomes a way of explaining serial killers and in particular cannibalism. If you take the vampire myth in comparison, I did talk about vampires in another video, and I've placed a link to it right here on the screen for you. But when dealing with the vampires, the story traced back to royals like Vlad the Impaler, but it only explains a lust for blood, not the lust for human flesh. Cannibalism is a trait that some serial killers possess, and it might be an explanation as to why the label werewolf would be used to categorize men who do behave like animals. The legend of the werewolf lives on to this day. When I grew up, they were mostly depicted as monsters in horror movies, but that has since turned into the version of a werewolf that is actually sometimes depicted as a hero. They often still have to battle their dark and untamed side, but werewolves aren't always seen as bad in literature. Not anymore. To that end, I think you can use the werewolf as both a hero or a villain, and that part is really up to you. If you want to put one of these creatures in your world, here is a few fun facts about the wolves that you can use as inspiration. Number one, if a younger wolf joins in on the pack's howling at an inappropriate time, they get severely punished, sometimes killed by the pack, as it may put the whole pack in danger, because you see it's how they communicate even during hunts, and the low pitch and long duration of a wolf's howl produces sound waves that transmits the sound at great distances, also even through dense forests. Number two, wolves will eat pretty much anything, even other wolves. Number three, with enough food to go around, wolves can become a 190-pound heavy animal. In most cases, they are closer to 100 pounds. Number four, the wolf can bite with a strength of around 400 pounds per square inch. In comparison, a lion and a white shark bites at about 600 pounds per square inch. Want some more inspiration? Alright, I have one more for you. In Norse mythology, we find the berserker. The term berserker translates to bear coat and refers to the heavy animal skills worn by certain warriors in battle. These fearsome warriors is said to have taken on the savage nature of the animals whose skins they wore. Whether or not you then have you actually have these people turn into wolves is up to you, but you see how you can use the werewolf legend for inspiration, even if you don't go all the way and actually incorporate an actual shapeshifter into your world. Let me say a few words on why we often find vampires and werewolves pitted against each other in literature. But first, I want to remind you that I post new videos every Monday. So if this is your first time here, do make sure to subscribe and learn to master the craft of creating immersing fantasy worlds, settings, and characters. Vampires versus werewolves. I have to admit that the premise alone is pretty cool. So maybe that is in part why it's rather popular. But these creatures are also each other's opposites. Vampires are intellectual, they're cold, they're calculating, whereas werewolves are wild, warm-blooded, and uncontrollable. In old materials, the werewolf has also been portrayed as subservient to the vampire. So all these things considered, it's quite obvious why they work so well as enemies. Wouldn't you agree? I hope you found this inspirational, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. In writing, I'm gearing up to put book 1, 2, and 3 of the Keystone Bone trilogy into a box set, but first I need to release book 3, the final book in the trilogy. It becomes available on the 24th of May, so if you haven't had the chance to read book 1 and book 2 yet, there is still time to dive in. There is a link to my website in the description field below. And don't forget to follow me on social media if you haven't done so already. Stay safe out there and see you next Monday.